I still remember the look on that man's face when 37 goats turned the grand opening tournament of Cedar Hollow Country Club into something that looked more like a livestock rodeo than a golf event. One goat was standing on top of a golf cart eating a sponsor banner. Another was rolling around in a sand trap like it had just discovered heaven. Somewhere near the ninth green, a local state senator was shouting at a groundskeeper while two of my younger bucks chased each other through a flower bed that probably cost more than my pickup truck. And the strange thing is, none of that would have happened if they hadn't tried to steal my land. My name is Wade Turner, and my family has been raising goats outside Red Creek, Kentucky, for 4 generations. We never had much money, but we had something better. We had land that belonged to us. 42 acres of hills, cedar trees, stubborn rock, and pasture that had carried my family through droughts, recessions, and more bad luck than I care to count. My grandfather used to say that land remembers who takes care of it. Back when I was younger, I thought that sounded like old man poetry. The older I got, the more I understood what he meant. Every fence post on that property had a story. Every field carried memories. I learned to drive a tractor on those hills. My father taught me how to mend fencing there. My mother used to bring lemonade out during hay season and sit under an old oak tree near the southern boundary. That southern boundary would eventually become the center of a fight that nearly ruined an entire country club. The trouble started when Cedar Hollow arrived. The developers came in with glossy brochures and promises about economic growth. Suddenly, everybody in town was talking about investment opportunities. Real estate prices jumped. New restaurants opened. Folks who had never touched a shovel in their lives started calling themselves land experts. At first, I honestly didn't care. The golf course sat down in the valley below my property. Rich people could hit little white balls all day if that made them happy. My goats stayed on the ridge. They stayed in the valley. Everybody wins. At least that's what I thought. One rainy morning in early spring, I walked my fence line after a storm. It was something I always did. Wind and rain have a way of finding weak spots. About halfway down the southern boundary, something felt wrong. One fence post wasn't broken. It had been moved. Not much. Maybe a foot or two. At first, I figured I was imagining things. Then I found another one. And another. Fresh concrete surrounded all 3 posts. I remember standing there staring at them while rain dripped off my hat brim. My stomach had that strange feeling you get when your brain notices a problem before your heart is willing to accept it. That evening, I dug through old records in my barn office. My grandfather never threw anything away. Survey maps, property tax documents, photographs, old notebooks. By midnight, I had papers spread across my entire kitchen table. And that's when I realized what had happened. The new fence wasn't where it belonged. Someone had moved sections of my boundary line inward, not by inches. In some places, nearly 12 feet. Across the entire stretch, they had quietly taken almost an acre of usable pasture. I sat there for a long time staring at those maps. An acre might not sound like much to some people, but when your livelihood depends on grass, an acre matters. The next morning, I got in my truck and drove down to Cedar Hollow. I wasn't angry yet. Honestly, I still believed there had been some kind of mistake. That belief lasted about 5 minutes after I met the man running the place. And looking back now, that conversation changed everything. The man who ran Cedar Hollow was named Preston Vance. You know the type. Perfect haircut, expensive watch, smile that never quite reached his eyes. The kind of guy who shook your hand while already calculating how much you were worth. His office overlooked the 18th hole through giant floor-to-ceiling windows. Everything inside looked polished enough to belong in a luxury hotel. Meanwhile, I was standing there in muddy boots that still had goat feed stuck to them. When I laid the survey maps across his desk, he barely glanced at them. "Mr. Turner," he said, leaning back comfortably, "property boundaries can become complicated during large development projects." I remember blinking. Complicated. That was the word he chose. Not mistake. Not misunderstanding. Complicated. "No," I said. "Stealing gets complicated. Property lines are actually pretty simple." His smile tightened. Just a little. The way somebody reacts when they're not used to hearing the word no. He folded his hands together. "Cedar Hollow has invested nearly $20 million into this community." I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was the first sign that he thought money somehow changed reality. What does that have to do with my fence? Development sometimes requires adjustments. Adjustments. There was another one. Funny how people never use honest words when they're doing dishonest things. I pointed toward the maps. Put it back. He stared at me for a moment. Then he actually chuckled. A soft little laugh. Like I was some stubborn child refusing vegetables. That was the moment something changed inside me. Not when they took the land. Not when I found the moved fence posts. The moment he laughed. Because that laugh told me everything. He wasn't planning to fix anything. He thought he could buy the problem. Or bully it. Or wait until I gave up. When I walked out of that office, I noticed something I hadn't paid attention to before. Construction crews were already working on the strip they'd taken. Irrigation lines. Decorative stonework. Imported landscaping. They were building as if the land already belonged to them. That should have worried me. Instead, it made me angry. And anger has a funny way of sharpening your attention. Over the next few weeks, I started documenting everything. Photos, measurements, videos, every new piece of construction, every fence alteration, every truck that crossed the disputed area. My daughter Emma kept telling me I was acting like a detective. Maybe I was, because deep down I knew something bigger was happening. The trouble was that most of the town didn't want to see it. Money has a way of making people look the other direction. Cedar Hollow was bringing jobs, tourists, investors. The local newspaper practically treated Preston Vance like he invented electricity. Suddenly people I'd known for years started saying things like, maybe progress requires compromise. Compromise. Funny word for losing your property. One evening I was eating dinner with Emma and my younger brother Luke when Emma asked a question that stuck with me. What happens if they just keep taking more? Nobody spoke for a few seconds. Because honestly, I didn't have a good answer. Around that same time, my goats started paying attention to the golf course. Now, if you've never owned goats, let me explain something important. Goats are not livestock. They're tiny criminals wearing fur. Most animals respect fences. Goats view fences as intellectual challenges. And once they discover something interesting on the other side, they'll spend every waking moment trying to reach it. The golf course grass was greener than anything we'd seen all summer. Perfectly watered, perfectly trimmed. Basically an all-you-can-eat buffet designed by a billionaire. My herd spent hours staring downhill, especially one goat named Daisy. Daisy was smart in ways that made me uncomfortable. She once opened a gate latch, escaped, and then returned before I noticed she was gone. Another time she stole an entire bag of hamburger buns out of Luke's truck. To this day, we still don't know how she opened the door. So when Cedar Hollow's contractors left sections of temporary fencing unsecured during construction, I knew trouble was coming. The first incident happened during a charity tournament. Nothing major. Only 8 goats escaped. Still enough to create complete chaos. I was repairing a water trough when Luke came flying across the pasture on his ATV. Wait, he yelled. Daisy's golfing again. I dropped my wrench immediately. By the time I reached the lower ridge, the scene looked ridiculous. One goat was standing in the middle of a fairway, chewing grass. 3 golfers were waving their clubs helplessly. A groundskeeper was attempting negotiations that seemed surprisingly sincere. And Daisy had somehow climbed into a golf cart. Preston arrived about 2 minutes later. His face looked like it might explode. "What is this?" he shouted. "My goats." "I can see that." Well, then we're both informed. That answer didn't help. Not even a little. His face turned bright red. "Your animals damaged private property." I pointed toward the broken temporary fencing. "They entered through your construction zone." "That's irrelevant." "No," I said. "It's extremely relevant." For a moment, I thought he might actually lose his temper completely. Instead, he pointed directly at me. "You're going to pay for every dollar." That was the first threat, not the last. And looking back, that small incident should have been the warning. Because if Cedar Hollow had simply restored the property line then, fixed the fencing properly, and admitted they crossed a boundary, everything would have ended. Instead, they doubled down. More landscaping appeared on my land. More irrigation systems. More stone pathways. Every week, the project pushed farther. And every week, my frustration grew. What I didn't know was that the storm about to hit Red Creek would change everything. Not just for me. Not just for Cedar Hollow. For the entire town. And when it happened, 37 goats would become the least of Preston Vance's problems. The storm arrived 3 weeks later. One of those late summer Kentucky storms that seemed determined to remind everybody who's actually in charge. Wind hammered the hills all night. Tree limbs snapped. Rain came sideways. Around 1 in the morning, I grabbed a flashlight and started checking fence lines because experience had taught me that storms expose every shortcut people take, especially expensive developers. Near the southern boundary, I found exactly what I expected. Several sections of temporary fencing had collapsed. Posts leaned at angles. Support braces were gone. The ground around Cedar Hollow's construction zone looked like a mess. I spent hours in the mud making emergency repairs. By sunrise, I was exhausted, but confident things would hold long enough to move the herd farther uphill. I was wrong. Very wrong. Around 10, that morning Emma burst through the front door. She wasn't running. She was sprinting. The kind of sprint people reserve for emergencies. Dad, she stopped to catch her breath. They got out. Every farmer knows that sentence. It's never good. How many? Her eyes widened. All of them. For a second, my brain simply refused to process the information. Then I heard something in the distance. Sirens. Not police sirens. Event sirens. The tournament was happening that day. Cedar Hollow's biggest event of the year. Sponsors. Politicians. Business leaders. Television crews. I didn't even answer. I grabbed my keys and drove. Halfway down the ridge, I knew we were in trouble. Golf carts were scattered everywhere. People were running. Someone was shouting through a loudspeaker. And 37 goats had apparently decided they were now paying members of Cedar Hollow Country Club. The scene looked impossible. One goat was standing on a refreshment table eating flower arrangements. 3 younger bucks were headbutting sponsor signs. Several goats had discovered the decorative gardens. Another had somehow gotten inside a sand bunker and was rolling around like a child at the beach. Sprinklers were shooting water in random directions where irrigation lines had been damaged. Guests in expensive clothing were filming everything. And right in the middle of it all stood Daisy. Of course it was Daisy, standing proudly on top of a white golf cart, chewing a tournament banner, looking happier than I'd ever seen her. The entire course looked like a disaster movie directed by Livestock. Then I saw Preston. He wasn't yelling. That was what scared me. He was standing completely still, watching. When I walked toward him, his eyes locked onto mine. "You did this." His voice was almost calm. I looked around at the destruction, the damaged fences, the landscaping built on my property, the chaos that had started because nobody wanted to admit they were wrong. Then I looked back at him. "No," I said quietly. "You did." For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then somewhere behind us, a goat jumped onto a catering table. Glass shattered. People screamed. And I honestly think that was the exact moment Preston decided to destroy me. 3 days later, the lawsuit arrived. $75,000. Property damage. Lost revenue. Landscaping destruction. Business interruption. And, my personal favorite, emotional distress suffered by club members. I read that section twice. Emma laughed, so hard she nearly fell out her chair. I didn't laugh, because beneath all the ridiculous language was a simple reality. They were trying to bury me. Not because they expected to win, because they expected me to quit. Most regular people can't afford long legal battles. That's how power works. You make defending yourself more expensive than surrendering. The problem was, they underestimated how stubborn my family could be. A week later, I hired Margaret Cole. Margaret had spent 30 years embarrassing arrogant corporations. She listened to my story, reviewed the documents, examined the survey maps, then leaned back in her chair. They're in serious trouble. That was the first good night's sleep I'd had in months. Once the legal process started, things began falling apart for Cedar Hollow. Former contractors started talking. Emails surfaced. Photos appeared. One former supervisor admitted management had ordered crews to shift fencing during expansion planning. Drone footage showed the original property line clearly. Public opinion slowly changed. The people who had dismissed me started asking questions. Then came depositions. And that's where Preston made his biggest mistake. He believed he was smarter than everyone else in the room. Margaret spent hours walking him through construction records, invoices, permits, property surveys, photographs. Then she placed an enlarged aerial image on the table. "Mr. Vance, can you explain why the original fence line visible here differs from the one your company installed?" He started talking about optimization, development strategy, landscape continuity, corporate language. The kind of language people use when they're trying to avoid simple truths. Margaret let him finish, then asked one question. Did your employees move Mr. Turner's fence without legal authorization? Silence. Long silence. The kind of silence that tells everybody everything. The courtroom was packed when trial finally began. Farmers, business owners, reporters. Half the county showed up. People love watching power get challenged, especially when they suspect power has been cheating. Cedar Hollow's attorneys tried painting me as irresponsible, claimed I failed to control my animals, claimed the invasion was intentional. But then witness after witness confirmed the same thing. The property line had been altered. The construction crossed legal boundaries. The fencing failures originated from unauthorized work performed by Cedar Hollow. One contractor delivered the testimony that changed everything. Under oath, he admitted concerns had been raised during construction. When asked why those concerns were ignored, he answered, "Management figured the farmer probably wouldn't notice." You could feel the room react. That sentence landed like a bomb. The judge looked furious. And for the first time, Preston stopped looking confident. 3 days later, the ruling arrived. Complete victory. The court ordered Cedar Hollow to restore the original property line, remove every unauthorized improvement, pay legal costs, accept responsibility for damages caused by compromised fencing. Preston never looked at me when the decision was read. Not once. The restoration cost Cedar Hollow millions. Irrigation systems had to be removed. Pathways demolished. Landscaping ripped out. Entire sections of the course redesigned. Everything they built on stolen land became a demolition project. Exactly what I warned them would happen. About a month later, I stood on the ridge watching crews reinstall the fence where it belonged. Fresh posts. Propé concreta. Solid work. The way it should have been done from the beginning. Beside me stood Daisy, chewing grass, completely unaware she had become a local legend. Life eventually returned to normal. The goats still roam the hills. Emma still jokes that Daisy should have received a legal settlement. And every now and then, when golfers glance nervously toward my fence line, I can't help smiling a little. The truth is, I never wanted revenge. I wanted respect. I wanted honesty. I wanted the piece of earth my family worked for generations. Nothing more. But here's the question I still think about sometimes. If somebody slowly took something your family spent generations building, if they assumed you were too small, too poor, or too ordinary to fight back, would you have handled it differently? Would you have accepted compensation? Would you have walked away? Or would you have fought until the very end? Let me know down in the comments, because people around Red Creek still argue about this story years later. Some think the country club got exactly what it deserved. Others think I should have controlled the goats better no matter what happened. I want to hear your side. And if you've ever dealt with powerful people who thought rules didn't apply to them, share your story below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.